Big ideas. Are there any big ideas?
No. I think something is happening now, and it's being fed by Barack Obama in the United States that may be having an effect here, and that is thinking big. This country, to me, this country has not thought big in probably 2 decades or more. And it is interesting that I point out 2 things, if I may. Ken Dryden has been giving a speech around Canada on college campuses the last 2 or 3 months. And he's talking about what's worthy of Canada. He's talking about ambition. He's talking the way very few people have talked about this country in a long time. Ken Dryden is not running for anything. The speech is nonpartisan. He's hoping that other people will pick up the spirit of what he's saying, but he's asking students what is worthy of this country, both at home and abroad. Michael Ignatieff, who is here the other night, and apparently had 1,000 people here.
Packed house upstairs.
Is talking, yes, his book, I would suggest what I read of it, is a political book. That book would have been different, perhaps, had he just been an historian, a commentator, and it had been written about his forebears, his ancestors, if that had come out before he was living. But he is there talking, I think, as well, about hitting certain themes of ambition. When you talk about linking the country with an east-west power grid, or when you talk about high-speed rail, or you talk about abroad coalitions of the willing, those are 3 ideas that have not been talked about, have not been embraced. Barack Obama, incidentally, is also talking about high-speed rail in the United States among his big ideas, which are healthcare and education and an economy, which he hopes to remake. But it's talking up to people. So I don't think there are a lot of ideas out there now, not in the governing class as it now is. And I think that Mr. Harper, were he to embrace a few, might see that there was a market there among Canadians for those ideas. Because under Pierre Trudeau, there were ideas. I mean, the Constitution didn't come from nowhere, nor did all the social reform that essentially remade Canada in the 60s come from nowhere. Even John Diefenbaker, for whom I have not a great deal of affection, talked about a northern vision. Brian Mulroney, you may not agree with him, but embraced free trade and constitutional reform with different, varying success. But we have not talked about big ideas in this country probably since the 80s. A lot of it you can say was about deficits in the 90s, but we've had 10 years throwing off surpluses in this country, and where's it gone? Where's the infrastructure? Where were the kinds of things we need in urban transit? Where's the support for culture? Where's the support for a whole number of other things we need? Where's an innovative foreign policy? It's not there, so I don't see the big ideas in it.
There's something else that Mr. Ignatieff mentioned. This is a pretty big idea. He said linking Quebec City to Windsor with essentially a bullet train. And then the other one he brought up was, what are we going to do on Canada's 150th anniversary? So 2017. And he didn't have any specific suggestions as to what we should do as a nation to mark that historic anniversary. But he's starting the conversation. I just wondered, if you got any thoughts on because there's a parallel there with Expo 67 and Pierre Trudeau.
Yeah, I think we're at a point where we need some very big ideas, and we've never been more desperately in need of great leadership than now. It's heartening to see Obama. It remains to be seen what will happen in Canada with someone like Michael Ignatieff. I certainly would agree that we haven't seen with Harper any kind of broad-based vision. There's been somewhat more narrow partisan vision. And with Trudeau, I stressed in my last answer the style issue, but he came to power because he did have a vision. He articulated it, and he, despite the failures of the various political failures he may have had in the course of his career as a politician, there was this greater sense that he was building a nation, and that he was doing it according to thoughts and ideas that were big and that were important. And I think now we need not only that, but that international spirit of how then that fits into the larger global situation, because we're no longer in a position where we can ignore that and where we can act in isolation.
I'd like to ask you guys about Parliament. I think as a media, I suppose, gets a little more vicious with the politicians. I think most people would agree that there are fewer and fewer people who in past generations may have entered politics aren't doing that today. And I wonder, do you guys think that there is a certain like noise in the Parliament today, and that we're not really seeing the leadership out of Parliament that we did in the past?
Well, when people, parliamentarians will tell you that the tone of House of Commons is far cruder than it was. I actually heard an elementary school principal saying he didn't want to bring school kids to question period because they didn't like the tone. I don't wax too nostalgic about that, having looked at what I call the low guttural catfight, which took place on the floor of the House of Commons between John Diefenbaker and Lester Pearson, pre-TV, for about 10 years. That was not pretty. It was not pretty. But there was, I think, a greater sense of the institution of Parliament and its importance. We don't, Jeff, I covered Parliament 25 years ago, and it was a rule, particularly with any wire service, that there had to be someone in the chamber at all times. And the Parliament in those days sat till 10 o'clock at night. But we felt an obligation, in case some great speech was given, it didn't happen very often, that we had to be there because the nation always should know about what was happening in Parliament. That's gone now. I mean, the gallery is empty half the time. There's nobody covering it. I mean, of course, the camera's running. You can go back and look at what people say. But by and large, the institution has been, I think, degraded. And politics has been, essentially, is not the honorable profession that it might have been seen a generation ago. It's not as noble, perhaps, as honorable as it might have been. And that's too bad for us, because a lot of good people are not going into politics. Talk to some people who are of a certain age, and they have been asked to run, and they're saying, why should I run? What's the power of an individual MP? I sat with an MP the other night, a conservative MP, who was a very thoughtful guy, who said, if people only knew what went on in committees, if people only knew about the erosion of democracy in that institution, I urge them to go public with this, to talk about it, they would be dismayed. So I think the institution has been eroded, and politics as a profession, as a calling, is not as attractive to people as it was, and that's sad for us.
Yeah, and I think you probably agree that when power is taken away from the Parliament, I think that makes Canada into a more technocratic society, where a lot of the power is really held by PMO staffers and these types. I just want to know, Nino, do you get big ideas from technocrats and bureaucrats?
Well, I personally don't. they don't usually speak to me. I'm a little out of my element here. I am a novelist after all. So I follow politics as a dilettante and an amateur. But there is, I think, an extent to which that has occurred over the past era. It has occurred as a way, really, of taking power away from the populace and making a matter of specialization. I mean, we see it particularly in economics, and we see where we've ended up as a result of that. And I think that was partly behind the kind of neoconservative shift we saw in the 80s through people like Reagan and Thatcher, and in Canada, Mulroney, and even through the Chrétien era. An era that I think we're just maybe seeing the end of now. And part of that was the sense that democracy is kind of impotent in the face of the forces of globalization and the forces of economics, and that therefore, sovereignty has no meaning. Sort of national or democratic power is almost irrelevant in the face of those forces, and there was a kind of ceding of responsibility that occurred, and I think some of the lack of leadership that we see coming out of that period is a result of that mentality, and the fact that people sort of kowtow to the technocrats and bureaucrats as if they knew what they were doing, which seems not to have been the case.